things my family loves best is some flatbread. And bread is something that we've missed from time to time once we started a ketogenic diet because bread is so convenient. It makes it easy to send sandwiches and pack lunches and that kind of thing. So this is a flatbread recipe, and the first time I made this, my daughter and I ate an entire recipe straight out of the oven. It is that good. So this is a flatbread, and it's super, super simple. The ingredients, some of them may sound a little bit strange, but once you get your pantry stocked, it really is not very odd at all. So this is an Italian flatbread. We always do it with an Italian flavor. You don't have to do that, but it makes a great pizza crust. My kids love to eat it with pepperoni and cheese, and it makes, like I said, just a great sandwich. So we can adjust the seasonings, and I'll show you how to do that. What I have already is 1 cup of coconut flour, and I've got that mixed in here already, just 1 cup of plain coconut flour. What I'm going to add to it is 2 tablespoons of psyllium husk. And psyllium husk powder, this is already powdered. You can buy it whole and then powder it yourself. But I ordered this online at Amazon. Basically, it's Metamucil without any flavoring, just plain. And so you can find it at Walmart. You're not going to find it in the baking aisle. You'll find it more with the laxatives in the pharmacy aisle. But anyway, it's just psyllium husk. So I'm going to add that in. Like I said, that's 2 tablespoons. So 1 cup coconut flour and 2 tablespoons of psyllium husk. To that, I'm going to add a 1/2 cup of Parmesan cheese. Now this is optional in the recipe, the original recipe, which I will link in the description of the video, but it really does help it, give it a great flavor and hold together. You're also going to add a 1/2 cup of oil. The original recipe calls for a 1/2 cup of coconut oil. That's a little sweet for our taste, so I like to use avocado oil or olive oil. Olive oil is not exactly ideal because olive oil will oxidize at high heats, so avocado oil works really well instead. You could use any oil that you prefer. I have wondered about using ghee, just melting ghee, and you could use just plain coconut oil. So that was a 1/2 cup of olive oil, and keep in mind I'm doubling this from the original recipe. So if the original recipe says a 1/4 cup, I'm sorry, a 1/2 cup of avocado oil. If the original recipe says a 1/4 cup, I'm doubling it, confusing myself. Then I'm going to add some seasonings, and these are all optional, but what my family enjoys and what works well is salt. Definitely want to put that in. That's 1/8 of a teaspoon. Actually, I did double that, so I think that's a 1/4 of a teaspoon of salt. I'm putting a teaspoon of garlic powder. Remember, we like the Italian flavor, and a tablespoon of Italian seasoning is going in. Okay, now we want to have boiling water, and this water's hot. I just took it off the boil. The recipe calls for a cup, so I'm going to need at least 2 cups, but one of the things I have found is that sometimes the amount of, or the brand of psyllium husk calls for different amounts of water. So I'm going to start with 2 cups. And then I'll add it just a little at a time, maybe a tablespoon or a 1/4 cup at a time, until I'm comfortable with what the dough actually looks like. So I'm going to put it in here and give it a stir. But between the coconut flour and the psyllium husk, it's absorbing a lot of the water. And I have it in a glass dish so you can see that. The water was really floating around, and you can see it now being absorbed. And it doesn't look all that great, but I promise you this is one of our favorites, and everybody who's tried it really likes it. It's the closest thing to pita bread I've had since we went low carb, high fat. And you probably can't see it very well, but it's still, there are bits of it that are not well mixed and parts of it that are dry. So I'm going to add maybe a 1/4 cup more. And I found that you really can't overdo the water. So that's a 1/4 cup. Let's try that. See how it works, because it will eventually dry out. So don't worry about getting too much water, but don't add a 1/2 cup at a time. A 1/4 cup should be fine. And again, what I understand from working with psyllium husk and reading others' experiences online, the brand of psyllium husk, and whether you get psyllium husk, well, remember I'm using powder, whether you grind it yourself or buy it already ground makes a difference. And you can see there again where it's kind of dry. So I may actually even add a little more. So far I've added 2 1/4 cups. You don't want it terribly, terribly wet, but you do want it well mixed. If I wasn't trying to videotape this, I probably would do this in a food processor or using my KitchenAid. It's so loud when I use that it becomes difficult to hear me. And so I don't like to use it when I'm taping. So I'm just stirring it by hand, and it's really thick. I'm gonna add a little more water. I'm not gonna measure because again, you're gonna have to use your judgment with this too. But once you get it well mixed and a nice ball, make sure you have clean hands, because what we're going to do is we're going to flatten it out on top of some parchment paper. So my oven is already preheated to 375. And let me slide all of this out of the way. It's just water, so I'm not going to worry so much about that. And I'm going to take a good part of the dough, and remember I doubled it. So I have the first pan out with parchment paper, and I'm just going to spread it into the pan. The technical term for what I'm doing right now is called mushing. I'm mushing it into the pan, and that is a very technical term. If you don't know that term, then you obviously have not spent time in the kitchen. Now let's talk as I'm mushing this out, and you want to get it relatively thin, so mush it out. But as I'm mushing it, I wanted to talk about other flavors that you could use. I've not thought about it as a sweetbread before, but I have wondered what you could do with it, making it a little bit sweeter with some cinnamon and other spices. I also wondered, there's a seasoning called Spike. I've wondered what you could do with that. And I've wondered about making it more of a Mexican flavor by adding cumin, maybe some dried cilantro, some chili powder. I wondered if you couldn't make it more like a tortilla. Okay, I'm squishing this out, and you can't see it, but well, I don't think you can see it, but I just had a little break in it. That's okay. Smush it down, fill in the hole. You want it relatively thin. It will increase in volume just a bit as it's baking, not much, but a little bit. But you want it relatively thin so that it gets crispy. And what I have done before is I'll take it out, I turn it over on a drying rack, and I will show you that. I'm gonna follow this all the way until it's done. But I take it out and put it on a drying rack or baking rack, or rather cooling rack. And then I spend time letting it either put it back in the oven, flipped over to dry it out, or just let it dry as it sits on the cooling rack. And I actually have this a little bit thinner than I'm comfortable with, so I'm gonna add that in. Okay, so you mush this out. Remember that highly technical term that you learned right here. I'm gonna mush it out until it's even all over the pan, and then I'm gonna put it in the oven. And so we'll be back with the completed flatbread, and you can get a sense of what it looks like. Okay, we're back, and the flatbread, I've just taken the first one out of the oven. This is about a 9 by 13 pan, by the way. So you can see it's browned up on the edges, and it's fairly firm. So what I'm gonna do is take my cooling rack and just put it right on top, and then I'll flip it. And yeah, it's cool enough I can do that. Our dog is helping. He's hoping I'll drop something. The dogs are great about that when I cook. So I've got it on the drying rack, and I'll just peel back the parchment paper. I like to use the parchment paper because it just makes it easy to pull in and out. And if you see it, it's glistening. It's a little bit moist on the bottom. I can put it back in the oven just to dry out this side, or I can let it sit on the drying rack. And I think what I'm gonna do, it's so moist, I think I actually am gonna put it back in the pan for just a few minutes. So it's super simple. I don't have to get more parchment paper. I'm just gonna do this, put it back on top, and it should flip over pretty easily. And you can see it's pretty forgiving. You can slide it over like that. Actually, that's not the back side, is it? I did that totally wrong. Let's do this. And like I said, it's pretty forgiving. I'll put it back in the oven, and then we'll see how it crisps up on that side. Okay, so finally the flatbread's out of the oven, and you can see it's nicely brown on this side, and it's fairly thin. We did a good job rolling that out. You can get an idea of the thickness there. It's warm, so it needs to cool, but before it cools too much, while it's still warm, and often I'll do this when it's still in the pan, you just want to take a pizza cutter and cut it. And what seems to work well is to cut it just in strips like this, and then cut it down the middle. And what you're trying to do is to get the sizes uniform enough that you can use it for sandwiches. So I'm just going to cut it like this. And at this point, like I said, you don't even have to cut it. You could use it for a pizza crust. You could use it for dips. I'm just going to go straight down the middle, as straight as I can, and I'm already not quite straight. And I'll continue to let it cool. And I store this in a Ziploc freezer bag in the freezer. What tends to work well in terms of thickness is like these two would make good mates for a sandwich because they're roughly the same size. And then I might put these two together because they're roughly the same size. And I'm just gonna let them cool. And again, you can use them for sandwiches. These are warm, but as they cool and when you make them, you can tell that they do roll up pretty well. So you could just fold them over if you wanted to without breaking them too badly. And they're sturdier as they cool. This is our flatbread, and I'll link to the recipe in the description of the video. I hope that you enjoy it.